I want to turn now to Justice and Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues, who's out of Washington right now. Jeff, we know that U.S. authorities have been very reluctant to label this as terrorism. Has that changed?
Well, it's German authorities, of course, who are leading this investigation, and the information that we are getting is that it is German investigators at first who were reluctant to jump to conclusions and call this terrorism. But what we've learned in the last few minutes is that the thinking currently is that this is leaning more toward being, in the eyes of investigators, an act of terrorism, just based on the evidence that they have so far. The source is not saying naming someone as responsible or a particular terrorism organization as responsible, but what I'm being told is, of course, this is one of these incidents that has the hallmarks, if you will, of ISIS, because of where this happened and how this attack was carried out in a shopping center. So what I'm hearing from a U.S. government official is that investigators are now more confident about classifying this shooting in Munich as a terrorist attack.
You know, Jeff, it's Don Dahler here in New York. Terrorism and attacks have their own kind of special logic that a lot of us don't understand. So given that, we were just talking about the fact that Germany has been so open to Islamic refugees from Syria, more so than perhaps any other nation in the world, certainly any other European nation, to open their arms. So the fact that they are potentially a target to this sort of thing, I mean, are you hearing, is there any kind of befuddlement over that?
No, I don't think investigators connect the two at this point. What we've learned from the attacks in Paris and from the attacks in Brussels is that ISIS is intent on carrying out attacks against the West. Given losses on the battlefield in Syria and Iraq, what ISIS has been saying to its sympathizers and to its operatives is, we're going to send you out across Europe, especially, perhaps through the migrant pool, to carry out attacks in your home countries or in Europe. And so what was revealed after Paris and Brussels were these intelligence gaps, where there are a lot of ISIS operatives, people who had battlefield experience in Syria and Iraq, going into Europe and then planning these attacks, coordinating with other operatives, these cells operating in Europe, and then carrying out attacks. That's what we saw in Paris, and obviously that was what we saw in Brussels. So it is still early on in this investigation, but when you look at how this was carried out, it just has the hallmarks of an ISIS-style attack. Again, this government source that I've been in contact with did not say that this was ISIS, but of course, ISIS is the prime suspect when you have something that unfolds this way, the targeting of a shopping center, a very public attack. This is the way ISIS is operating, and ISIS is trying to spread as much fear as possible, and that's why you have these very high-profile targets selected by ISIS operatives. Again, it's too early, so investigators aren't specifically saying ISIS, but I think the thinking is, based on what is currently known, rather than being cautious about naming this terrorism, what we're hearing right now is that investigators are leaning toward classifying this attack in Munich as an act of terrorism.
Jeff,
go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. Our investigative unit, Len Tepper, is reporting that, according to a source, the shooting began in the McDonald's, and as reported, 6 dead, and then the shooter turned the gun on himself and killed himself. This, again, is just coming from our investigative unit. Jeff, what can you tell us about that? We're hearing that he ultimately took his own life. We're also hearing that there could be 2 potential other shooters on the loose.
Well, it is so hard sometimes, Rena, early on to separate fact from fiction, and that's why, as journalists, we have to be cautious. However, what we know and this is standard operating procedure for investigators, not only here in the U.S., but across the globe. You're going to try and look at surveillance video, and that will obviously help decipher or figure out what actually happened at that location. But in the meantime, you have to make sure that there aren't other people involved if it is just one suspect. So they're not ruling anything out. They got to figure out the scope of this attack, who was involved. And then if it's just one person, well, was that one person in touch with other people? And if it's more than one person, well, we got to round everybody up to make sure that this is the end of the attack. Because the concern is that there could be another wave of something coming. But for right now, there is, German officials have said this, there is a lot of misinformation out there, and that's why they're trying to be cautious, and you have to separate fact from fiction. But the immediate concern is that there could be someone out there or multiple suspects out there planning other attacks.
And as you said, you pointed out, Jeff, it does fit the modus operandi of ISIS, a soft target like that, a hit quickly and take as many casualties as you can and go. Have you been hearing anything about are U.S. forces on any kind of heightened alert right now?
Well, they're not specifically saying that they're on heightened alert, but given the nature of these attacks recently, I think it's fair to say that law enforcement across the globe, and especially in this country, is paying attention to what's happening in Munich, because we've just seen so many of these incidents recently that you have to try to track down every lead that you possibly can. Who were these attackers, or who was this attacker in contact with? We've seen the latest developments in the Nice, France attack, where French prosecutors have determined that he had accomplices, the man behind that attack. And that took a lot of police work, looking at cell phone communications, looking at computer communications. So you have to chase down every lead, because, it's like a tree, and you want to see what each branch leads to, and could it lead to someone here in the U.S., or could it lead to someone in the U.K.? So law enforcement agencies across the globe, specifically across the West, are going to be working together to track down as much information as possible. And that's really some of the latest developments in terms of law enforcement that has come out of Paris and Brussels, this effort to coordinate better between European investigators and U.S. investigators. Yeah. They're working hard at trying to get better at closing some of these intelligence gaps. And the only way to do that, as U.S. officials learned from 9/11, the only way to do that is to share information. And that has been a problem in the past in Europe. But there are efforts underway to improve this intelligence sharing to prevent attacks before they happen.
Yeah. All right, Jeff Pegues, CBS News correspondent. I know you're working this story for Evening News, so we're going to go ahead and cut you loose for now. Thank you so much for your input on that.